They say empires fall with swords, but sometimes they rot from the bedchamber. In the year 38 CE, at the very height of Rome's power, a young bride stepped into the marble halls of the Palatine Palace. Her name was Valyria Messalina, just 15 years old, chosen as wife to Emperor Claudius, a man more than twice her age, frail in body, yet heavy with imperial authority. To the Roman people, this union was a promise, a fertile empress of noble blood, a girl who would embody virtue, bear heirs, and stabilize a dynasty still haunted by the madness of Caligula. But beneath the garlands of her wedding day, a darker story was already stirring, the one that would etch her name into history as Rome's most perverted empress. At first glance, Messalina seemed every inch the perfect consort. Ancient chroniclers describe her as possessing the kind of beauty Rome adored: pale skin, golden hair, and the delicate aristocratic features that set her apart from the common women of the city. She fulfilled her early duties flawlessly, bearing Claudius 2 children, and appearing at state rituals with grace and modesty. In the rigid moral code of a Roman society, where women were divided into categories of matrona, the virtuous wife, and meretrix, the prostitute, she was expected to personify chastity. But what if that very contrast between what Rome demanded of her and what she secretly craved became the engine of her downfall? Did you know that Messalina is said to have slipped away from the palace at night disguised as a prostitute, working in the brothel of the Sabora district? Tacitus records that she competed with Rome's lowest courtesans, determined to prove she could endure more clients than any of them. Imagine the horror of a senator stumbling into such a den of vice, only to recognize the empress herself beneath the grease paint and cheap perfumes. It wasn't desperation that drove her. It was thrill, rebellion, and a compulsive need to weaponize her sexuality against the very society that idolized her purity. But brothel escapades were only the beginning. Inside the palace, she transformed Claudius's court into a theater of obscenity. Picture the feasts: couches draped in silk, golden platters stacked with roasted dormice, and figs dripping with honey, wine spilling from jeweled cups. Senators reclined in uneasy silence while Messalina presided not as a dignified hostess, but as a mistress of ceremonies, summoning gladiators fresh from the arena, captives from distant provinces, even noble sons and daughters to amuse her with humiliating games. One whispered account claimed she once arranged a contest between herself and Rome's most celebrated prostitute, Scylla, wagering that she could outlast the professional in sheer endurance. By dawn, Sailor collapsed in exhaustion after servicing 25 men. Messalina continued, surpassing 30. Her victory greeted not with cheers, but with horrified silence. Why did she do it? Was it lust beyond measure, or something colder? A calculated way to control the empire's elite through shame. Her victims spanned every rank. Generals coerced into submission, aristocratic women blackmailed into degrading acts, senators' sons dragged into her spectacles. Resistance was nearly impossible. Those who refused her advances often met sudden ends. A tribune found floating in the Tiber, a noble stripped of office overnight. The message was clear. Rome's empress did not tolerate denial. Even religion was not spared. She staged ceremonies in mockery of Venus and Bacchus, draping herself in priestly robes before tearing them away, commanding participants to enact obscene rituals in the name of the gods. To Rome, religion was the glue of empire, binding citizen to citizen, city to city. By corrupting it, she declared herself the only true deity in the palace, goddess not of love, but of domination. Imagine the emotional wreckage in Roman households. A senator's wife, humiliated in public, returning home in silence. A daughter torn from her father's villa, reappearing days later with eyes that no longer met his. Claudius himself, often portrayed as weak or naive, seemed either unable or unwilling to stop her. Was he blind to her excesses, or complicit through silence? Historians still debate, but the fact remains. Messalina's name spread through the empire not as a symbol of fertility and dignity, but as a curse. And yet, the empire endured its empress. Markets bustled, legions marched, chariots thundered in the Circus Maximus. The facade of Rome's greatness continued, even as its moral core withered behind closed doors. Every whisper about Messalina chipped at the Senate's authority. Every scandal weakened faith in the emperor's household. Rome, once priding itself on discipline and virtues, found its highest lady transforming debauchery into imperial policy. The Palatine ruins still stand today. Their fresco faded, their columns cracked, but beneath the dust of centuries lingers her shadow, the girl bride who became the most feared courtesan of her age. Her story asks a question that chills across time. What happens when the one chosen to embody virtue instead makes vice her crown? Power in Rome was never just written in laws or carved in marble. It was whispered in bedrooms, bargained over at feasts, and in the case of Messalina, weaponized through the body of an empress. As the years of her rule unfolded, her appetites did not fade. They grew bolder, more calculated, and far more dangerous. What began as secret midnight escapades soon evolved into a machinery of corruption that entwined Rome's most powerful men and women in her web of humiliation. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Juvenal, each in his own venomous way, chronicled her descent. They describe how Messalina established what could only be called an imperial brothel, hidden in plain sight within a luxurious villa near the Campus Martis. This was not a den for common lust. This was an operation crafted with ruthless intelligence. Aristocratic women coerced under threat of ruin were forced to serve alongside her. Senators, generals, and merchants were invited in under false pretenses, only to find themselves compromised in ways that ensured their silence. Every whispered word, every trembling secret shared in the heat of shame, was recorded by her loyal attendants. Did you know that, according to later accounts, she used this intelligence to blackmail entire families, securing wealth, governorships, and obedience without raising a single legion? The micro scenes of her reign are chilling. Imagine a young noblewoman dragged from her father's atrium and forced to play courtesan under Messalina's watchful gaze. Picture senators stripped of their togas, forced into degrading spectacles before rivals who would later exploit their humiliation. One soldier who escaped the villa described the experience as worse than the battlefield, confessing, "Blood dries. Shame never does." This was Messalina's genius. She had discovered that sexual humiliation could break men more thoroughly than the sword. Her cruelty went hand in hand with spectacle. By the early 40s CE, her gatherings had become infamous. Cloaked as religious festivals to Venus or they began, solemn in sense, rising to the gods, then descended into staged orgies, where Rome's ruling class found themselves performing acts they would never dare confess. Messalina orchestrated it all like a conductor. Senators were paired with their enemies, generals forced into grotesque contests, noble wives unveiled before roaring crowds of the elite. Refusal was impossible, compliance was ruin. Every participant walked away bound not by loyalty, but by shared, suffocating shame. But perhaps the most disturbing account centered not on Messalina's public spectacles, but her obsession with competition. She treated sex as a gladiatorial sport. Her most notorious contest, the endurance match against Sila, Rome's most renowned prostitute, stunned the capital. Before a select audience of nobles, Caire paced herself carefully, tending to 25 men through the long night before exhaustion overwhelmed her. Messalina did not stop. She pressed on, surpassing 30, refusing to yield until no more volunteers remained. By dawn she had won, and with that victory, shattered every illusion of Roman dignity. The Empress of Rome, wife of Claudius, had reduced herself to spectacle, reeing in degradation, not as shame, but as triumph. Why? What drives a woman raised in privilege, adored for her beauty, and crowned as Empress to embrace degradation as her ultimate pleasure. Historians struggle to explain it. Some argue insatiable lust, others a thirst for power. Still others see the trauma of being married so young to an older, awkward husband. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more chilling. For Messalina, the contrast itself was intoxicating. The greater her public role demanded chastity, the more thrilling it was to betray it. Her empire of lust had consequences. The Senate, already weakened, found itself paralyzed by blackmail. Governors appointed not for skill, but for silence. Generals loyal, not through honor, but through fear of exposure. Rome's policies twisted under her unseen hand. Foreign ambassadors whispered of strange negotiations, where senators seemed subdued, distracted, almost broken. The empire's leadership was being slowly devoured by one woman's obsession, yet decadence breeds enemies. The soldiers, who had long tolerated imperial excess, began to mutter. Loyalty was strained when rumors spread that their comrades too had been summoned to Messalina's villa, stripped of their dignity before her guests. For soldiers hardened by battle, humiliation was worse than death. The barracks echoed with whispers, curses that once would have meant treason. Her paranoia grew. Guards were tightened. Punishments grew harsher. The spectacles became crueler, as if doubling down on shame could smother rebellion. But each act carved new cracks in the fragile facade of her empire of desire. Rome had survived fire, plague, and invasion, but could it survive an empress who ruled through degradation? The breaking point came in 48 CE, in an act so audacious it still staggers historians. While Claudius was away in Ostia, Messalina staged a wedding, not a secret tryst or private oath, but a full Roman marriage to her lover, the senator Gacilli. The ceremony included priests, witnesses, contracts, every ritual Rome required to legitimize union. By law, she was now married to Caius, while still bearing the title of Empress and wife of Claudius. It was not scandal, it was open rebellion. She had stepped from shadows into daylight, her lust transformed into treason. What drove her to such madness? Did she truly believe Claudius would submit, that the Senate would act, that Rome would accept two emperors? Or was it compulsion, her need to escalate until destruction was inevitable? Whatever the reason, the act was fatal. Loyal freedmen rushed to inform Claudius. At first he laughed, thinking it a wild rumor. But as evidence mounted, disbelief gave way to fury. The emperor mocked and cuckolded finally acted. Claudius returned to Rome with soldiers at his back. Messalina was found in the gardens of the palace she once ruled like a goddess of vice. Ancient accounts describe her final moments with icy vividness. She begged, pleaded, offered her children as hostages. When no mercy came, she attempted to take her own life, but faltered. A soldier drove the blade home. The empress who had enslaved Rome with shame died not in grandeur, but in panic and blood. Her punishment did not end with death. Claudius ordered her statues toppled, her name erased, her memory condemned to oblivion, damnio memoriale. Yet Rome is never forgotten. The more they tried to bury her, the louder her legend grew. Stand in the ruins of the Palatine today, and the silence is heavy. Tourists may marvel at the mosaics, but the stones whisper of something darker. The brothel, the orgies, the blackmail, the forbidden marriage. Messalina's story endures not because Rome wanted it told, but because it could not be silenced. And in the end, her legacy is a warning carved across centuries. Empires do not collapse only from invasion, but from corruption that fierce within their own walls. She proved that lust could be as destructive as steel, that shame could bind men tighter than chains. History closes her chapter with a truth as brutal as her life. Rome's most dangerous weapon was not the sword, but its empress,